So yes, thank you very much for coming. My name is Ari, and I'm here from San Francisco, and I'm really, really excited to be here. So I'll be talking today about API design and construction with Django using my preferred API library, Tastypie. Okay. So just a really quick rundown in case you are new to building APIs. Here's a review. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and the fundamental is that you are creating an interface to your application for a third-party developer to write programs to. So building an API lets somebody else write an application that uses your technology. And a web API, in particular, the kind that I'm talking about today, is a collection of URLs using a certain pattern that point to either a web service that you've created or data locations for your data. These APIs take a number of different patterns, and a pattern that's become very popular in the last 8 years or so goes by the name REST. That stands for Representational State Transfer. Super quick overview of that. It relies on a standardized pattern of HTTP requests. You can create data using posts. You can read data with a GET request, update data with a PUT request, and delete with delete. The advantage of this pattern is that it provides a very formal, scripted way, it's very predictable, to interact with and represent the data that's in your database. So, if you're requesting data, you make a GET request. This is referred to as being idempotent because making the GET request does not change the data in the system. If you are needing to create data, when you send a post request, under this model, you're guaranteed to get a new database record and a URL back to that new database record so that you can trust that you didn't overwrite any data by creating a new record. And when you delete something, you pass in the ID of the record that you wanted to delete, so you're certain that you only deleted that record and not anything else. So just, this is a quick rundown of URLs that you would be likely to see if you were constructing a REST API. So why wouldn't you do this? That looks great. That's a very ordered, very predictable way of going about your API design. And what I've discovered, based on working on my last API project, was frequently you'll want to work with data that actually doesn't fit that well into your database schema. And either it's data that you're calculating on the fly, or it's data that you are retrieving that you have no reason to save. The two cases where this comes up are calculation, as I mentioned, and search. And this poses a problem for people saying, I want to make a RESTful API. Because RESTful sounds great. It sounds soothing without even knowing what it is. And you think, OK, this is marketable. I want to offer this as a product. But then you come to this data use case, and you realize, I can't do that. And some people freak out a little bit and say, it's not RESTful. And my point is that that is actually OK. The other ways of going about API, I shouldn't say other, but divergences from this pattern, where you don't have such a formalized structure, and you're just kind of making up your own URLs, have a long history and have in the past been described as remote procedure call APIs, where there's a URL whose structure has been invented by the developer, and there's no particular relationship between the request and the data. So you invent one URL for making GET requests and a different URL for posting to. OK, 10 minutes. Thanks. OK, thanks. And this can sort of limp along if you document it well. However, in particular, GET has a vulnerability where if you pass sensitive data as a GET request, then you're exposing that you're exposing it as a security hole. So there are very good reasons to at least contemplate the REST model before you diverge back into unstructured URLs. But I've already talked about cases where you might want to have a different URL structure. Post requests, in addition to preserving data security, are better at sending more complex data structures. And furthermore, when you're allowing people to search, or when you're allowing people to do calculations, you probably don't want to store every single result that someone makes as they iterate through their data. I'd like to propose a way in using Django to mix these patterns and to be clear about when you're using REST and when you're using RPC patterns and why. So I've mentioned this. I've used a couple different examples using photo URLs. I have a hypothetical site in mind where I want to create an API for it, and I want to, let's say, be able to get photos by getting their IDs, and I want to be able to post photos by sending the file plus file metadata. But then I want to do something else. I want to be able to calculate the average color in an image, and then calculate the average colors of a set of images, and maybe make an agreement with a paint manufacturer where if API users come up with the color of images that they like, they can go get custom paint mixed. So how would I go about doing that? Let's do it. So I would start by using Django, because I heart Django. And this is the very simple model that I would create to represent a photo. It's got a title, it's got a date time for when I made it, and it has an image field for the image itself. And then I'm going to pre-calculate the average color of the pixels within the image, because there's no reason to calculate that on the fly. So far, with this, I can make a GUI for it very easily using Django. But how do I make this into an API? This is where I would install Tastypie. This is just one of a number of different API frameworks, but it's one that I've used very successfully, and I found it really easy to adapt to this purpose. OK, so as soon as I've got Tastypie installed with pip install Django-Tastypie, then I go and create an API.py file. This file uses a Tastypie resource and the model that I've just created. And I define a meta class that has a couple of preset variables that tell Tastypie what to do. I tell it to use the photo model for this resource. I give it the resource name of photo. So that string, resource name, is what's actually going to appear in the URL. And then I say on this resource, get and post are the only allowed ways of interacting. And then all I have to do to wire it up as an API is go into my urls.py file, which I've already got from Django, and add a line for API where I include the photo resource that I've instantiated, because the photo resource will include this URLs object, and it will do all URL resolution for you at that point. OK, so cool. At this point, I have created a REST API. I can prove it to myself. I can query for one photo's data by hitting the get URL for one photo. Can I upload a photo? Yes, I can. This isn't quite enough code to do it. You need a little more glue code to get the multi-part file encoding across, but this is 80% of the way there. And of course, you can do a list get request on all photos that you've uploaded. So this is what you would see if you made a get request to /API/photo at this point. And you'll see these IDs later. So resource URI, the last line in each of the blobs of JSON that you see is the resource URI, and that is a distinct URL to the photo, proving to me that this is actually a REST API. OK, so I'm most of the way done, but I still don't have that color averaging, paint mixing calculation service that I wanted. So these are the images that I wanted to upload. I've got IDs 60, 34, and 29. And how am I going to do this? I'm going to go back into my API.py file, and I'm going to redefine a Tastypie method called prepend URLs. This is kind of a secret workhorse in Tastypie, because you can use it to add custom routes to the resource that you've defined, and then add custom defined methods, and then hook them up within the within the definition of the URL within prepend URLs. So you create whatever helper method you want, name it, and prepend URLs. And within that helper method, you just have to remember to create a custom response that returns the object that you want to see in JSON. So this is what you would have to add. We're going to go back to API.py, and we're not going to change anything about the model resource definition. But we're going to add another method, find average color, where first I'm going to check that this really is a post request. Going to give myself an empty response object. If response parameters are available, if request parameters are available, then I'm going to find the average colors of all the photos that I have passed in as arguments. I'm going to do some terribly awesome image processing math to find the average color. If you're actually reading that line, you can tell that it's not actually doing that, but it's a demo. And finally, I'm going to stick that in the response and pass that to create response and and we'll see what comes back. Lastly, all I need to do is redefine prepend URLs with this one line that creates a route that mentions find average color. And I can test this out by writing a post request. I can just use curl, and I can do curl with a JSON header and a post request and a data packet of photo IDs 29, 34, and 60 to this URL I've just created, and see what comes back. So you might notice at this point that this kind of looks like a GET request. It's a little bit weird that you would use post here. And in fact, you could do this if instead of post, you said, I want a GET request, and I'm just going to say my photo IDs parameter is going to have a comma-separated list, 29, 34, and 60. Yes, that would work. I wanted to explore this way of doing things because I found use cases where you end up having quite complex objects that you want to do calculations on. If you are doing heavy lifting statistics, you might want to pass in a statistical distribution, and you might want to pass a fully formed JSON object to this endpoint. And it's not very pleasant to do that, or possibly, not necessarily even possible to do that using the limitations of a GET request string. So I wanted to just experiment with even doing this as a post request, and it turns out to work fine. OK, so what happens? You get a color back. You get an average color, and it turns out to be this nice shade of pink. So I guess now I know what color paint I'm ordering. Or like pink. That's what you get. And so if you're interested in checking out the history of API design practices, best patterns, and recommendations, I really enjoyed that bit.ly link, 8 lowercase LKO, uppercase PK. If you are interested in experimenting with Django API creation and you would like to check out alternatives to Tastypie, check out Django packages. I highly recommend Tastypie, though. It's pretty great. And lastly, if you are interested in cloning a repo with the sample code that I wrote for this talk to check it out, you're welcome to do that on my GitHub. And that repo is called Snapjar. So great. Thank you very much for listening.
Does anyone have any questions?
Sure.
Hi there, cool talk.
Thanks.
Do you have any thoughts on general kind of RESTful API design versus kind of like a nested kind of structure, kind of like a GitHub style where it's like /user, /repo, /ID, versus more of like a resource-oriented style that kind of Tastypie gives you out of the box, where you just have like a photo and then you just kind of append filters on to drill down?
Mm-hmm. So my thought on that is that oh, I got the mic. OK, cool. My thought on that is that GitHub is solving a specific problem of trying to give. My read on that is that GitHub structure allows them to define a kind of homepage or bucket for every user they have. And so you're identifying user accounts based on that part of the path, and then you're able to make API requests based on where you're routed in that URL. I'm not sure that I have well-formed thoughts on it. Sorry, I'm not really answering your question. OK.
What are your thoughts on kind of going the other way, where let's say if for longer running processes, like let's say you had to do that image analysis in batch, and you had to incorporate some long polling and some status.
Yeah.
And traditionally you might use that as like use an RPC as an API around that. But what are your thoughts on like making it RESTful and actually modeling the process itself and making that RESTful?
I am thinking about ways to do that, since you're since you're bringing it up. And there is a problem there, right? Because if a resource doesn't exist yet, it's not strictly RESTful. So I'm speaking purely off the cuff, and I'm not sure that I'm actually recommending this, but I'm thinking it would be maybe possible to create a status route or status URL that you could return immediately, and that you would have to you could resolve continuously until the time that the RESTful resource for the result was available. That's the best thing I can come up with on the spot. But I think that would work, but I'm not sure that there would be an actual advantage to doing that over actually, for example, doing it RPC style as we were just talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question.
Anyone else?
Sorry, with respect to what you were saying about the idempotency of the different request methods, I just wanted to mention that RFC 2616 has a great description about why you should use the various methods. And I just wanted to recommend it.
Thank you.
I find a lot of people don't read it.
What can you say again the name of the RFC?
It's RFC 2616.
2616.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read that. Thanks.
Anyone else? All right. Well, let's give a big thanks to Ari.